Well, can you imagine a president of the United States that is debunking US foreign policy for the first quarter of this century? That's the inner meaning of that. He doesn't even need to comment. He just presents what Jeffrey is saying, and everything is correct. For instance, you never hear anybody in Washington, New York, talk about Operation Timber Sycamore. It's taboo. You never hear conflicting narratives. And Jeffrey pointed to, this is a war of narrative. Of course it is. The narrative has been bent cosmically, we can say, from 9/11 onwards, non-stop, by Republicans or Democrats. This is bipartisan. This is the American ruling elites. They build the narratives. And of course, they're paid shills in Congress, in Capitol Hill, in Washington, and in mainstream media, and what our friend Ray McGovern called the Misimat, the larger industrial complex, which includes media, think tanks, etc. This is what they do. The only thing that the empire knows what to do, apart from regime change, interventions, dreams of annexation, scholar revolutions, etc., is to imprint a global narrative, because they control the global system of communications, essentially, including social media. So Jeffrey is absolutely spot on. And the details that, it's a 3 minutes or so, right? The details are excellent, because it's a microcosm of what has been done in terms of US foreign policy, following what Netanyahu and those cycles in Tel Aviv wanted since before 9/11, since the late millennium, 1998, 1999. That's it. In a nutshell, that's it. And the problem is Trump may be aware of that, not the details, of course, but of course he's going to go clashing once again straight on against these very powerful silos in the deep state. And this is the key question for Trump 2.0 on a domestic level. How is he going to deal with the deep state? Is he going to have, considering everyone that he's nominated so far, it's not going anywhere. And considering the fact that, 80 to 90% are hardcore Zionists, is going to get much worse, in fact. So this expectation that some may have across the global South, I'm not going to get into details, because I know our audience knows very well who I'm talking about, that Trump may be a sort of progressive force running towards some sort of peace, a settlement, either in Ukraine or in the Middle East, West Asia. It's completely false. No. Essentially, what he's going to do is to follow the Zionist orders on West Asia as a whole. And in terms of Ukraine, he's going to try to go for some sort of deal that he knows that the Russians, from the beginning, are going to say no. And then from then onwards, it will be the usual mix of threats, intimidation, rearmament of Ukraine, etc. So the prospects are, I would say, terrifying in many aspects.
Do you think that Donald Trump would do, in my opinion, he's going to do whatever he has at his disposal, short of military confrontation with Iran? Because that would be devastating for the United States right now, with the conflict in Ukraine, starting a new war in the Middle East. Because he's talking about Greenland, he's talking about Panama, he's talking about Canada, Mexico,
everything.
It's a big game in his mind. It's a game, it's a fight between the United States and China. It's not in the Middle East, it's not in Ukraine. Here comes the question, how powerful are these people in his administration, in his team, to drag him into a conflict, in a war, a direct war with Iran in the Middle East?
Exactly, Nima. This is what we're going to see perhaps the first few weeks. Maybe by the end of February, we're going to have already a pretty good idea where this is all going. Not only these, of course, this completely unmeasured proclamations of annexing everything in sight, which is what has been happening these past few days, right? But facts, of course, and how the trade war, which is going to be a simultaneous trade war against Europe and China, the first steps. So everyone is very curious about that on a geoeconomic level and on a geopolitical level, if there's going to be any sort of movement, not only vocal against Iran, especially because 3 days before Trump gets to power, as we all know, on January 17th in Moscow, Putin and Pezeshkian are going to sit down together and sign the comprehensive agreement between Russia and Iran. This is enormous, enormous, and something that I have been saying many podcasts for quite a while now. This collaboration on a military level, okay, this is economics, energy, investments, of course, but on the military level, it's what I heard from top Iranian officials in Moscow nearly 2 years ago. This was probably in March 2023. They said, look, the Russians said, what do you need? They said, whatever you need, it's yours, and vice versa. So they are really talking military terms at the highest level, and for nearly 2 years now. And this is going to be solidified by this comprehensive partnership, which is even more sophisticated than the Iran-China partnership. The Iran-China partnership, which they signed in 2021, so it's nearly 4 years now. It's basically energy and economic cooperation. The Russia-Iran partnership, it's much, much bigger, and the scope is much bigger and includes very, very close military cooperation. So we don't know, none of us, not to mention the Americans, how the Americans are going to react to that, or if they of the Trump 2.0 will understand the meaning of this deal. So, another thing that, the first few weeks will reveal to all of us. And the unstated part, Nima, of Trump 2.0 geopolitical and geoeconomic, it's the war against BRICS. And obviously, they cannot even state it openly because they don't even understand what BRICS is all about, especially the Trump people. Well, the Obama people didn't have a clue. Trump people, flying times 2, they don't have a clue. And early this week, we had already an enormous bombshell, geopolitical, geoeconomic. Indonesia was accepted as a full BRICS member, not as a partner. You all remember that in Kazan, they announced 13 new possible BRICS partners. Indonesia was one of them. Well, 9 of them, until early this week, they responded positively, and they became officially BRICS partners. There are 4 that haven't responded yet, including Turkey. But then early this week, the Brazilian presidency of BRICS, they announced out of the blue, nobody was expecting this, that Indonesia now is a full partner. So now it's BRICS with Iran and Indonesia, right? India, Iran, and Indonesia. But this is beyond enormous because it's the consolidation of BRICS in Southeast Asia. Indonesia is the economic powerhouse of Southeast Asia. For the moment, by PPP is, if I'm not mistaken, the 7th largest economy in the world. It's going to be one of the biggest economies of this century. I had the pleasure and the privilege to work a lot of Indonesia, especially in the 90s, when they were after the Suharto era. You could see the immense possibility. It's an enormously wealthy country with a relatively well-educated population, with huge challenges that they start to address. For instance, they are delocalizing the capital from Jakarta, which is clogged all the time, to the huge island of Sulawesi. So they're going to develop one of the largest islands of the archipelago, one of the largest islands in the world, for that matter, by this delocalization. So, the prospects for Indonesia are outstanding and widely respected inside ASEAN, of course. And obviously, we already have Malaysia and Thailand as partners. So Southeast Asia is one of the focuses of development for the future. Like Putin said at the end of the year, like he started to say at the Valdai meeting, that the two largest poles of development in the near future are Africa and Southeast Asia. And obviously, the BRICS are looking at Africa and Southeast Asia clearly. None of that, Nima and our audience, is examined in detail by the think tanks in the US. What they do is the exact opposite. They identify these countries, these new powerhouses that are part of BRICS, as targets, choice targets. And we can say, even before Trump 2.0 starts, that the choice targets of this administration are going to be BRICS powerhouses. And this is building on this is something that, before talking to you, I was writing my first column of the year, which is going to be long, because I had to outline all these details and contradictions, of course. One of them is that a year and a half ago, American think tanks start talking about swing states. Not the American version, as you all know, but geopolitically. And they identified 6 swing states, all BRICS or BRICS partners. At the time, there were 3 official BRICS, Brazil, India, and South Africa, and 3 possible BRICS. Then they became partners, and in the case of Indonesia, now a full member, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, and Turkey. So what was the message that the American think tank land was propagating? We're going after all these, and we're going to destabilize all these. Simple as that. Because they are a threat to the rules-based international order. And this is bipartisan, Nima, and all of you. It will come from these exiting absolutely ghastly administration, probably the worst administration more than American history, to Trump 2.0. This is not going to change. And in many aspects, in the case of Iran, for instance, it's going to get much, much more hardcore. And in the case of Brazil, for instance, the Americans will keep inserting Brazil everywhere, using fifth columnists, the comprador elites in Brazil, etc., the Brazilian oligarchy, old school and new school, everything. And India as well. India is under their watch. South Africa, same thing. I was there 2 months ago. Same thing. So this is the unstated war. So it's much, much bigger than only US against China. And obviously, you won't read that on American mainstream media.
And you talk about Brazil, but it seems to me that Donald Trump is trying to make some sort of, to consolidate the US hegemony in the North and the South America.
Yes.
What's going on? What do we expect from Donald Trump here in South America, in your opinion?
Well, Monroe Doctrine 2.0 on steroids, lots of steroids. There will be some key targets, starting with Venezuela and Nicaragua, of course. And they already have Argentina in the bag, which is an enormous tactical victory. So Argentina will keep destabilizing South American Union, among other things. So this is already on the American camp. In Brazil, as you know very well, Nima, is the most complex node of this whole charade. The Brazilian presidency of BRICS is going to be key. They started very well. The fact that, of course, this is a consensual decision. So all the BRICS decided that Indonesia now is one of us as a full member. But the fact that the Brazilians, of course, the Brazilian presidency, they had to announce it. That's an excellent start. And an excellent start for BRICS as a whole. Even considering that essentially the Brazilian presidency is going to last half the year, because they're going to have a stupid decision of having the BRICS summit in the middle of the year because of that COP stupidity at the end of the year in the Amazon, right? So let's see what they'll be able to do in 6 months. If they pick up the ball, considering what the Russians managed to do last year, which was immensely impressive. I follow it for half a year while I was in Russia last year. I spent almost half the year in Russia, and I was following very closely the BRICS discussion groups, the BRICS Business Council, the Sherpas, etc. And they managed to advance BRICS by leaps and bounds in 1 year. The Brazilians won't do that, especially because of this extremely complicated vector of the anti-BRICS lobby that is very, very active even inside the Brazilian foreign ministry. We don't know the repercussions of that and how much these people are going to sabotage BRICS going further in leaps and bounds. But the point is, and Brazilians forgive me if I say it bluntly, Brazil is not the leader of BRICS. The leaders of BRICS are Russia and China. So the basic policies and the basic drive and the overall conceptualization of where BRICS are going is Beijing and Moscow. Everybody knows that. And now, of course, the fact that China, in this very turbulent 2025, they will be focusing on 3 levels, more or less. And one of them is directly linked to BRICS. First one is the tech war between China and the US, which it's not in terms of who's winning, but China is fulfilling the objectives that they wanted 10 years ago. They are fulfilling most of them in 2025, which is to become a leader in ultra specialized high-tech domains. They identified 10 of them. They are already leader in 4 or 5. Soon they will be leader in 7 or so. And by 2030, they will probably be leader in all of those 10. So we can say that they are fulfilling their objectives. And the US is falling behind in all these, everything, quantum physics, artificial intelligence, of course, is very close. But, like electric vehicles, for instance, China is already, out there, solar panels, you name it. So they are fulfilling their objectives. So this is one vector. The other vector is very, very important. And it's the crucial BRICS-related vector. Expansion of Chinese trade and markets all across the global south, the global majority. And that includes BRICS, ASEAN, and APEC. APEC basically coordinates trade and investment across Asia Pacific. China is not all of them. I would say at least 90% of all APEC nations, China is the #1 trade partner of all these. ASEAN, no question. ASEAN, China is the major trade partner of all of those in ASEAN, all the ASEAN 10. And BRICS, of course, is linked to BRI as well. And APEC is also linked to BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, New Silk Roads. So you see that what the Chinese were planning in 2013, when they came up with the concept of Belt and Road Initiative, at the time was one belt, one road, and nobody understood what that meant. They had to change it, right? So this was less than 12 years ago. It's amazing what they managed to do in less than 12 years, because they have a Belt and Road projects all across the global south, including South America, the port in Chancay in Peru, that was inaugurated before the G20 by Xi in person. And of course, Asia, and this is a BRI connection with APEC, with Asia Pacific. And Asia Pacific, including the South American Pacific. So, nobody could expect that this will go so fast in a matter of only 1 decade. And that's where we are. And don't forget, when you read the official conceptualization of Belt and Road, it goes all the way to 2049. So we are just in the beginning, There's still a long way to go, So this won't deviate. The Chinese won't deviate of what they planned in everything, in the tech war, achieving a technical supremacy in high-tech sectors, and of course, expanding their trade and investment connections all across the global south, global majority, and that includes all these organizations, BRICS, APEC, ASEAN, etc. So these are the two main vectors for the Chinese. And even if Trump launches a trade war like he did in 2018, essentially, he came to power beginning of 2017, and he launched the trade war 1 year later. Blowback. It didn't work. It did not. China was not undermined because of this trade war, and there was severe blowback against American interests. So the Chinese are not worried. What I have been reading in very, very serious Chinese outlets, Guanxia or relatively independent analysts in China, no, they are not worried. They are concentrated, and they are focused on Belt and Road, APEC, ASEAN, and BRICS is, it's even stronger than it was 1 or 2 years ago.
When we look at China, it's a big factory, it's a big production machine.
Yes.
And they want to produce. They do need energy. They do need gas and oil. They can get it from Russia and Iran.
Mm-hmm.
And they do need a market to sell the things that they produce.
Exactly.
I don't know if you watched Antony Blinken's interview with New York Times, in which he said,
"Oh my God, I saw some excerpts." Yeah.
He said how successfully they could disconnect the European countries from China in terms of economic relationship.
This is what they want, Nima. Yeah.
And here comes the question in the mind of China: who's going to be the next market for us? Who's going to buy the things that we produce in China? They need Indonesia, they need Malaysia, they need Asia to buy the things. They need Southwest Asia, Russia, Eurasia, all of them together. It seems to me that the United States, the way that Donald Trump is trying to make things up in the United States, it's all about China, and China knows what they're doing. I don't know if the United States gets to the point that they want to get under Donald Trump.
No, they don't have a strategy, Nima. They don't think strategically. The Democrats never thought strategically, and Trump doesn't think strategically long term. It's different. It's a sort of World Wrestling Federation kind of ruling. It's very spectacular, but it's all fake at the same time. There's no substance to it. We were discussing until 1 or 2 minutes ago, the Chinese know exactly where they're going, and they know exactly where they're going since the beginning of the Belt and Road nearly 12 years ago. Xi came to power in 2012, and he announced the Belt and Road in Jakarta and first in Astana in Kazakhstan, and then in Jakarta 2013. This is their overarching geopolitical and geoeconomic blueprint for the next few decades, in fact. So, as you know, the Chinese have 5-year plans, which in fact are 15-year plans. They think at least 15 years in advance, In the case of Belt and Road, they're already thinking 30 years in advance. So they know that. So whatever happens in Washington and changes of administration, for them, and it's the Chinese way, of course. It is Sun Tzu all the time. It's deception, very sophisticated way of no frontal aggression, capitalizing on the enemy's mistakes, which is something that not only China, but the BRICS, starting in 2025, now are going to do. They will capitalize on the deep state's mistakes as an organization. That's why you need a very high level of understanding among, well, I would say at least among the foreign ministers, but especially between the leaders of the BRICS nations. They need to be talking all the time among themselves in terms of how BRICS will capitalize on. There will be lots of mistakes by the deep state and by Trump 2.0 in terms of everything that has been announced, sort of, spectacular style, circus style. We're going to tax everybody that will try to bypass the US dollar, all that crap. There are endless ways of circumventing and bypassing these so-called policies, So, and this is what Russia and China, as leader of BRICS, are trying to impress on everybody else. We need to be talking all the time because this is a work in progress. During Kazan, there was we emerged with the concept of the BRICS lab. BRICS is a gigantic lab, in fact. They are starting to test models of convergence, of sustainable development, of paying for settlement trade in different currencies, in their mutual currencies, etc. This is a work in progress, and it's already ongoing, and will keep spreading. So when we talk about de-dollarization, once again, it's not that BRICS will come up with the BRICS currency this year. No, that's not the point. The point is diversifying their trade using mostly their national currencies. And this is already ongoing and will keep expanding, whatever the Americans do and whoever is in power in Washington. This is the most important point. And of course, the fact that China, the way they think long term includes learning from their mistakes all the time. This is classic Deng Xiaoping, crossing the river while feeling the stones implies that you can slip in one of the stones, you fall, then you rise again and you keep crossing. And this is what they do. They learn a lot on how to implement new Belt and Road projects. They're learning a lot on their dialogue with all their ASEAN partners. They're learning a lot from the Africans. When the Africans go to China, they tell the Chinese, look, this project here, that's not working because of the Chinese tweak it. This is very, very important. This implies what? Diplomacy, listening to the other, paying attention to the other. Everybody's sitting at the same table, and everybody has a right to express themselves and present problems at the table. And the Chinese, which used to be, let's say, the Chinese pyramid way of looking at the rest of the world, is changing little by little, and they are learning, which is a very complicated process for a civilization that is a nation state that is so powerful, ancient, and of course ruled the world for a great deal of recorded history. And that's fascinating to see this process going on, which in parallel we have the Russian process, which is this Russian idea of integrating Eurasia, which their official concept is called Greater Eurasia Partnership. It's the Russian interpretation of the Belt and Road, essentially. Of course, Russia doesn't have the financial firepower of China, but Russia has a lot of soft power across Eurasia. And now, extra soft power in Southeast Asia, in Africa, in parts of Latin America. That helps this Russian vision, which is not only Eurasia. We can even talk of Afro-Eurasia. And in terms of China as well, this process of integration is Afro-Eurasian, essentially, and including parts of Latin America. So what do the Americans have to offer to counterpoint all that? Literally nothing. And gets worse. They are supporting at the same time a genocide, an endless genocide, recognized as such by practically the whole global majority. And now they are supporting terrorists in power in a former sovereign Arab nation. The global majority looks at that and said, all that bullshit that you talked about Al-Qaeda for 25 years and all that, that's what it was, bullshit. Now these people are in power in a former sovereign nation, and you love it. So this is what the empire of chaos, as I called it over 10 years ago, is offering the global majority. Support for terrorism and support for genocide. It's very easy, Nima, if you are, for instance, the leader of Indonesia, to look around and say, okay, who I'm going to align with? It's a done deal, right? And for many African nations who want to be part of BRICS, South American nations want to be part of BRICS, the rest of Southeast Asia, apart from Singapore, Singapore is a very peculiar case because Singapore is a financial warehouse, it's a sort of American aircraft carrier in Southeast Asia, and they try to a measure of equilibrium between the US and China and the West and China. Because they're very small, they can do that. And because they're very small and because they are basically an enormous warehouse and a crossroads of trade. But the rest of Southeast Asia, they are frankly, apart from the Philippines, which is a colony, of course, they are frankly aligned with China and with their major trade partner. And whatever the US does in terms of this destabilization is not going to change that.